by Veronique Altglas, Judaizing Christianity and Christian Zionism in Northern Ireland for God, Israel and Ulster, which is published by Routledge just towards the end of last year. I'm not sure we actually have a copy of the, we do have a copy of the book, right? So we can turn the camera on that so people can see it. We've also got some flyers up here. Routledge are not particularly, reader friendly in terms of pricing. There is a kind of a discount with the flyer, but it's still quite expensive. So, but if you are interested in the book, please take a flyer. It has a table of contents. It has information on the text, and do order it for your library. It's a copy in the Queen's Library already. For anyone who's interested. Okay, so I'm just going to very briefly introduce our three speakers and then pass over to them. They're all going to talk about the book. We'll maybe take a few questions if anyone has any. And then we have some refreshments, and we'll kind of adjourn to the other side of the room for a more informal part of proceedings after that. So Dr. Veronique Altglas, who's the author of the book, is senior lecturer in sociology here in Queen's. She's a graduate of the École Pratique des Attitudes in Paris, and she researches transformations of religion in modern societies and cross-national comparisons of responses to religious diversity. She's published a number of books, including Le Nouvel Hinduisme Occidental in 2005, From Yoga to Kabbalah, Religious Exoticism and the Logics of Bricolage in 2014, and Bringing the Social Back into the Sociology of Religion in 2018, and also Religion and Conflict in Northern Ireland, What Does Religion Do in 2022. So Veronique is obviously going to speak about the book, but we're privileged today to have two commentators on the book as well. So Dr. Christian Zionism is reader in human geography in the School of Natural and Built Environment here at Queen's, where he researches apocalyptic thought in its relations to geopolitics, climate change, conspiracy theories, and religion, especially in the United States and Israel-Palestine. He's the co-editor, amongst many publications, of the Bloomsbury Handbook of Millennialism and Apocalypticism in 2025, and is finishing a book on Christian Zionists and landscapes of the apocalypse in Israel-Palestine. Professor Gladys Gagnon is professor of the sociology of religion in the School of Social Sciences, Education and Social Work here at Queen's. She researches the Northern Ireland conflict, evangelicalism, emerging religions, and the impact of COVID-19 on religion. It's also published very widely in these fields, including co-editing very recently the Oxford Handbook of Religion in Modern Ireland in 2024. So I think Gladys is going to start.
No,
Veronique
I
is
got
going
an
to start,
intro.
and then Gladys is going to speak. So Veronique.
Thank you so much, Peter. I really want to thank the Irish Studies, the Mitchell Institute, and Mary Kieran for this invitation to discuss this book today, but also Gladys and Tristan, who accepted to read a quite thick volume and talk about it. So what is this book about? It's about a recent and fascinating religious trend, which you may or may have not heard about, called messianic congregation, or it's hard to talk about a movement, perhaps a trend. It started in the 1960s in the US, very West Coast, like many things in the 1960s. But since then, it has expanded to Israel, South America, the African continent, and beyond. And these messianic congregations or groups tend to combine what we could call an evangelical culture. They would retain the importance, the vital importance to be saved by Jesus, would pay attention to prophecies about the end times, the return of the Messiah, and they would combine this with elements of Jewish liturgy, with symbols from Judaism, with some of the traditions. They would revisit the Jewish identity of Jesus, which makes sense, and consider the importance of the Jewish people in Israel, in particular in relation to the end times. So they are also de facto Christian Zionists. Depending on which congregation, some may decide to wear the Jewish prayer shawl, the skull cap. They may eat kosher or part of it. They may discuss or even undertake circumcision, celebrate Jewish festivals, and so forth. And that trend of Judaization, it's a very hard word to say, of Christianity is quite unprecedented. Not because Christians haven't been interested before in Judaism, but because this trend has no authoritative structure. Those communities are really springing up independently, locally, from the grassroots, really, with leaders who experiment with various liturgic approaches, having different trajectories. So the result of what we can see worldwide is actually a wide range of different phenomena, with combination of practices and beliefs that are constantly evolving and negotiated. And I think perhaps some of us are working actually on different, kind of groups as well. So we will have a problem of defining what is there a messianic movement? So it's fast growing, it's transnational. It may also represent now a permanent, if not a legitimate trend within evangelical Christianity. And I think as such, the Messianic movement has facilitated a widespread adoption of Jewish practices and symbolism. So, for example, the Passover meal has become quite popular in many churches here in Northern Ireland and elsewhere. But you also have worldwide other examples that you can range into this trend. I'm thinking about the replica. I don't know if you heard about this, but the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God in Brazil, in São Paulo, they have built a replica of the Solomon Temple, like full size. It's very impressive. You could also have a look on supporters of Donald Trump blowing the shofar. It's a horn used for particular rituals in Judaism when they stormed the Capitol in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. And that, if you want, takes me to the fact that it's not only that, the use of Israel flag and the shofar is used in a widespread way in religious circles, but also in political mobilization that actually mobilize people who may or may not be religious at all. So we are really in a new phase, perhaps. So this movement raises questions that I think are really interesting. The first one is about deregulation of religion. When it's so deregulated that, you have a huge range of combination of Judaism and Christianity at the same time. And I think for us as sociologists, anthropologists, it's challenging and fascinating to try to think about what religion is becoming today. The other thing I was very interested in is what could be the logic of the combination of Christian and Jewish elements in beliefs and practices of messianic groups. So before working on that trend, I was working on what we call spiritual seekers, people who are practicing yoga and meditation, but could also suddenly find that Buddhism would be interesting. And oh yeah, well, perhaps crystal and perhaps a bit of Kabbalah and so forth. So the doxa in the sociology of religion was like, well, these are personal combinations, everything goes. And my argument was like, actually, not everything goes. There are social and cultural logics that we should interpret and understanding. And that is kind of similar in a way. It's like, what's really happening? What is the logic, the search for meaning in those combinations? The third question I had also is to try to understand this an intricate fascination for the Jewish people and for Judaism. This is something I had also encountered when I studied the Kabbalah Center, which is a new religious movement attracting spiritual seekers. One is very well known, Madonna, of course. And it's interesting to see common element, a praise and an admiration for the Jewish people, and at the same time, some disappointment in that case is, why don't you accept, all of them accept Jesus as the Messiah is a question. And finally, for fourth question, what is the political significance of the support for the state of Israel, which, has become, of course, very important today to try to understand. So the book addresses those 4 lines of inquiry, and I'm not going to dive into them today because I would need a lot of hours. You'll be exhausted and you will have to read the book. But more importantly, I want to let Tristan and Gladys the opportunity to discuss what they want to discuss, and perhaps you to ask any question you might be interested in. And perhaps just for me to finish, I wanted to situate a bit this book in my research trajectory. So I'm not an expert in evangelical Christianity at all. And actually, I thought I would not be interested, so I was very surprised. No, but I was very surprised studying religion because when I was young, I thought it was not interesting. So I always did things that, I didn't plan to do in my life, weirdly enough, because I'm a bit of a control freak despite that. But this bricolage, this combination, I found really fascinating in relation to what I was studying before. And I want to say for those here who are perhaps research students or early career, it is daunting to change your subfield. It's risky, but it's actually probably one of the best things I've ever done, because it allows you to write things from a different perspective and always have a comparative approach in your mind. So this book is a bit special because, of course, it's about a messianic congregation, but I can't stop comparing, this congregation of conservative Protestant with spiritual seekers I had studied before. And there's a tendency in the sociology of religion to oppose perhaps, the conservative and the fundamentalist on the one hand, and on the other hand, the spiritual seekers, and they would be so different. And actually, I think the differences are not perhaps where we think they are. And at the same time, there's continuity with what I've done before. I've always been interested in religion and social class, social experience, social trajectory, and this is still part of this book. Now, I'm not an expert in evangelical Christianity. However, it's not just a superficial, overview. This study is grounded in a very extended ethnography of a particular congregation in Northern Ireland, which is called Ahava in the book. I had a blessing in disguise. I failed in having funding to do this research. Which meant that I had all the time in the world to do this research. I didn't have to promise anything to anyone. And I could really dive and stay as long as I felt, I wanted, and I needed to know those people and to understand what was important for them. And I want to insist on the importance of ethnography. I think a few of you here are anthropologists. Yes, I'm a sociologist, but I think that the ethnography is the queen, of the methods in social sciences. This is the best way to get to know people, hanging out, having small chat, after a few years, you really have perhaps a better, I think, sense that if you only do interviews. And I've done interviews, but only when I get to know people. And I think if you have this wonderful chance of not having funding and have time, this is the way to go. And it was very important, and I'm going to finish on this, because the people I study here were not just a group meeting, regularly. They were traveling a lot in different churches, different events. And it was very important, of course, to follow, because to have a sense of their experience. I've discovered a lot of churches in Northern Ireland, but also sometimes social or political events as well. And that allowed me to actually use this study as a prism, to have a wider and a broader a view of Christian Zionism and Zionism in general in Northern Ireland, and try to understand why it is so important for some people and why it is meaningful, why it resonates so much with this place. And this is the part of that I would like to study later on. So, well, thank you, and thank you very much for having read the book. Oh yeah, I forgot that detail. Yeah.
Well, I'll talk about it.
Oh, you'll talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah, don't worry.
A bit of story in this.
A slightly different version of it.
Right, I'll kick off then. So by now, hopefully, all of you are getting more eager to read this book. It's Judaizing Christianity and Christian Zionism in Northern Ireland. So my aim today really is to commend it further to you by highlighting 3 key contributions. So those will be its exemplary methods, its insights into Northern Ireland politics, and its wider significance for the social scientific study of religion. So I'll start with methods, and in some ways I'm taking over where you left off, right? So in this era when religion is, or not religion, when research is often rushed and compromised by time-limited funding, this book demonstrates what is possible when a scholar really slows down and invests in a classic ethnography. So Veronique spent 4 years immersed in the lives of her participants, combining participant observation, media analysis, and document collection. So her approach reflects not only methodological rigor over, a pretty long period of time, but also an ethical commitment, I think, to portraying the subjects honestly. So the reader will quickly see that Veronique truly got to know the participants. She attended their meetings and events, visited an informant in Hungary, even traveled to Israel with them. So there are vivid vignettes throughout the book that bring this religious world to life. So as a reader, I really felt drawn in to their experiences and perspectives. When Veronique finally conducted interviews, they were enriched by the relationships she had built through going along, attending those events, traveling with them. Then she also has candid reflections on emotional challenges. So, for instance, navigating her ascribed Jewish identity, I suppose that's a fair enough way to put it. And then also coping with a significant personal loss during the period of research. This really adds depth to the narrative throughout the book. And the participants through this emerge as actually really caring individuals, I think in many cases, sending spontaneous messages of support during some of those difficult times. So for Ahava members, they would revere Jews as bearers of divine truth, really, and central figures in eschatological narratives. So this fascination is not just at the level of ideas or theology, but also deeply emotional. So this, I think, shaped their interactions with Veronique herself, and you really see this in the book. So she was consistently recognized and introduced as Jewish, and this is a key part of the ethnography. And her discomfort sometimes with that, but eventual recognition of the dynamic as analytically significant is quite poignant and important as well. Equally instructive are Veronique's reflections on method. So her critique, as she's already mentioned, on the over-reliance on interviews and the sociology of religion really underscores the importance of immersion and contextual understanding. Interviews, she argues, reveal what people think they do, not necessarily what they actually do. And for those of us who rely heavily on interviews and guilty as charged, right? This is a timely reminder to acknowledge their limitations and to consider anchoring them in deeper observation and engagement. So that's the first part. Then the second part, understanding Northern Ireland politics. So why do loyalists fly Israeli flags? Right? This is one of the burning questions. So if you've ever wondered why Israeli flags appear in loyalist areas, this book will offer some compelling insights on that question. And of course, previous research has addressed this phenomenon, but I think this book provides some greater depth, showing how support for Israel functions as a symbolic resource, reinforcing Protestant identity and legitimizing unionism through biblical narratives. It's all there in the subtitle, For God, Israel, and Ulster. So it might be assumed that the ethnographic study of a small group, which is actually now disbanded, Ahava no longer exists as a congregation, would have very little to say about Northern Ireland politics. Yet Veronique convincingly situates this group within the region's distinctive religious and political landscape, which is, as we know, marked by high levels of religiosity and a strong Protestant evangelical presence. So here, Christian Zionism emerges as a potent ideology, aligning conservative evangelicals, loyalists, and unionist politicians. So it goes beyond the group she studies, and that is demonstrated convincingly, I think. So although Ahava no longer meets, Christian Zionism continues to flourish here, and I suspect that most former members remain active in similar networks. And for them, spiritual warfare can encompass political issues, so Brexit, elections, Israel's victories, in opposition to liberal reforms. So the integration of the divine and the political here will challenge secular assumptions about the separation from religion and politics. Ahava members at times interpreted world events from Gaza to Brexit through the lens of the prophetic and the apocalyptic, merging the divine and the political realms. Apocalyptic worldviews, while providing meaning and agency in some cases, also on the other hand risk fostering a type of fatalism, really, and resistance to compromise, which is also politically significant. So this raises important questions. For instance, do symbolic politics and apocalyptic assumptions translate into tangible change or remain performative? And that's a question she poses in the book. So in this regard, the relationship between the DUP and Christian Zionism is instructive and discussed in the book. Veronique provides multiple examples of DUP support for Israel. And while many DUP politicians are likely actually sympathetic to Israel, this support seems primarily a way to maintain ties with conservative evangelicals. That is part of their base, really, even as the party tries to navigate an increasingly secular society. At the same time, Veronique has a story about an Ahava member who stopped voting for the DUP after one of its representatives publicly supported a two-state solution. So none of this is straightforward. And of course, the DUP itself has little actual power to really influence Middle Eastern politics. Its leverage in Westminster and Europe is limited. So DUP support for Israel, then, we could argue is largely performative, even if genuine on the part of some politicians, in a way to reinforce Protestant unionist and loyalist identity. Yet this isn't inconsequential either, and its impact on the streets of Northern Ireland is very real. So that's the second bit. The third bit, then, the wider contributions to the social scientific study of religion. So again, it might seem that an ethnography of a small group in Northern Ireland would have limited relevance beyond the region. But in fact, Veronique's comparisons to her earlier work, which she's already alluded to, from yoga to Kabbalah, are especially insightful. So she situates Ahava within broader trends of religious deregulation. Again, this is a global trend, really. And as traditional denominational structures weaken, fluid networks and individualized forms of religiosity emerge. So again, this resonates globally. While mainstream churches or religious groups decline, new movements, whether spiritual but not religious, or conservative fundamentalists, seem to proliferate. So the comparison between the spiritual seekers and conservative evangelicals is particularly thought-provoking. As she said, you don't see this done very often. But there are really intriguing parallels. Both reject institutional authority and navigate this fragmented religious world, but their motivations are really quite different, obviously. So spiritual seekers, pursue self-realization and autonomy, and this reflects middle-class aspirations, really, whereas Ahava's members' anti-institutional stance stems, at least in part, from their own lived experiences of powerlessness and marginalization as part of a squeezed working class, I suppose. So for Ahava, authenticity was linked to origins, the Hebrew roots of Christianity, rather than universal techniques for self-improvement that you might see in New Age movements. Ahava's members were also predominantly older, working class individuals with limited autonomy and symbolic capital in the wider social world. So the anti-institutional stance here, the apocalyptic narratives and conservative values reflect not just theology and ideas, but also social experiences of marginalization that are really real. So this insight is crucial because it situates religious bricolage within broader structures of inequality and challenges overly ideological explanations that would overlook those material conditions. So I think a lesser ethnographer, if we want to put it that way, could have dramatized Ahava's practices and beliefs, but that's not what we get in this book. In contrast, Veronique demonstrates that this quest for religious authenticity and depth, it's not confined to liberal or alternative milieus, but can permeate conservative settings as well. So this insight invites us to reconsider the dominant sociological frameworks that portray all conservatives as sort of rigid and prescriptive. Ahava, while conservative, is also flexible and selectively appropriates Jewish practices and reinterprets traditions. It even draws on the heritage of the Celtic Church and stories of St. Patrick reinventing new forms of Irishness, which, while unattractive to cultural Catholics, it must be said, would it actually inspire those who adopt them in their Christian life. So this hybridity underscores the complexity of contemporary religion, where the boundaries and categories blur. So to conclude, this book reminds us that conservative countercultures are not relics of the past, but dynamic actors in the present. So in times of uncertainty, perceived threats to Christianity, movements like Ahava offer their members authenticity, belonging, and a framework to interpret and actually intervene in the world in ways they feel is meaningful. Whether these interventions remain symbolic or gain political traction is an open question, not just in Northern Ireland, but in an increasingly polarized world. Thanks.
Okay, it's my turn. First of all, congrats. It's amazing. In some ways, I feel like you and I are in a pottery class together. And I am still working on the introductory ashtray. And I look over at her and she's got 3 vases done already, you know? So well done. There were several books, you didn't mention that she has published actually. So right. I'm going to be a bit meta here. What is the job of a discussant, especially the second discussant, after we've already got the lowdown of what the book is about, right? Am I to just lay on some platitudes, and praise? It's amazing. Great book. Yeah. Am I to be critical? No, of course not. I got no criticisms at all. It's amazing. Really well done. But, do I pose questions? No, because that's stealing the thunder from the audience. I could do this thing that's common among the audience and just sort of talk about myself or maybe how I would have done the research differently. But I'm not going to do that either.
Thank you.
Yeah. So no, it's a bit of a conundrum. In some ways, I need to do all of these things and weave a line between all of them without stepping in a category too much. So this is a fine book. Congrats again. A work that took a decade to come to fruition, right? You started in 2014. Yeah, more than a decade. Early in the fieldwork process, I did go to church and synagogue with Veronique. In 2016, we started about, right, just a handful of times, in part to keep my foot sort of in the fieldwork door without actually ever intending to write about this particular group. And I was reminded we were in a call with a colleague recently who described me as Veronique's emotional support animal. And I thought, sometimes the truth, especially the objectifying kind, hurts. Yeah, no denying there. So, allow me to recall one rainy night. You were going to tell this story, but thank you for allowing me to tell it, right? We're going to go to Stormont. It's the middle of winter. We're going to go see the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. I'm going to repeat that, the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. Okay, this is the sort of leading Christian lobby group in Jerusalem. It's a group run by South Africans, actually. And it's this rainy night, it's dark, and Veronique has this tiny little Euro hatchback. I don't know if you still have that car, but I don't really fit in it. And so, you had to take the seat all the way back, and I'm still sort of crunched into it. And I had not been to Stormont. You hadn't either, had you?
Yeah, not by car. No.
Not by car, no, right. So there's these gates, it's dark. I said, where are we going to go? And they're like, go up over there and then around here. And just before you get up to Stormont, you're supposed to actually go to a parking lot. We went the roundabout and then actually tried to park in front of Stormont. And there's these guys with weapons, And I jokingly, I thought she would think it was a joke too. I was like, step on it, go right through. And then she did. She pushed on the gas and went through. I was like, no, trying to slink away, assuming the car would be riddled with bullets. But it wasn't, and we were fine. I learned that day that Veronique doesn't play, Yeah, so anyway, the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem, or the ICEJ. This place doesn't give out passports, right? And rather, they're a Christian Zionist institute that collects funds for activities, many of which are for Jews around the world to make aliyah, or to return to what they perceive as irredemptive rights to Israel, but also to fund colonization in the West Bank, everything from buying IDF soldiers rifle scopes to purchasing recreation centers and settlements,
to funding the largest non-Jewish conference in Israel-Palestine each year called the Feast of Tabernacles, where roughly 8,000 people go. Yeah. And the main message here is rather apocalyptic in some ways, right? I mean, they have a vision for Israel, that the metes and bounds of Israel will extend to the river Euphrates, the Mediterranean, and down to the River Nile. Yeah. And that it's that the foundation from which Christ can return, right? And that all will be judged, and the true believers, the righteous ones, will go up to heaven. And among them would be groups like Ahava, right? And you went with them to Israel and did all of the sort of major stops of where Jesus might have walked and prayed and these sorts of things, right? These are Veronique subjects. Each year at this particular conference, Ariel Sharon first graced it in 1999, and ever since it's largely been Netanyahu. He speaks in front of it every year, right? Why? Because it's an incredibly important book. That's why, this is why her book is so incredibly important, right? This is a global group, not just important in Ireland, right? But the ways in which they're networked, in your work as well, around the world, right? Finland, Norway, South Africa, Argentina, Germany, Belize, Australia, even Papua New Guinea, right? Mm-hmm. This is tens of millions of people networked across the globe who have real material and corporeal geopolitical impacts, around the world. Ones that I would like to spell out here at some level. I mean, we've heard the review already, and I think just the impact of your book and importance of it, I think, is important to spell out very clearly of why, we should be studying these things and reading about them. And try to sell a few books for you here. So Christian Zionists in some ways have developed their own foreign policy, that challenges realist, liberal, and Marxist positions. I don't know what you might want to call them. Christian Zionist foreign policy. I mean, we're waiting here for somebody to come conceptualize this, I guess, and get a lot of citations. With Israel as this kind of axis mundi, as you talk about it, Christian Zionists have, to quote the historian Sack van Berkovich, turned geography into eschatology. Israel has become their redeemer nation in some ways, right? On the other hand, Christian Zionists are also very much embedded in the halls of power, right? From Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth to the American ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. They're both Christian Zionists, and Huckabee has claimed to travel to Israel over 100 times. That's a lot of times. 100 times. So think about how many 100 times is for somebody to go anywhere, right? Even if you lived in Lisbon 100 times, 100 times, like
Tesco.
What's that?
Tesco.
Tesco, yeah. Have you been to all the 100 times? So, reflecting recently on a trip to Israel in December 2023, Mike Huckabee said, he told the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, quote, "We are not dealing with an issue that is political, social, economic, or geographical. We are dealing with an issue that is spiritual. This is evil. The worst level of evil we have on the planet today, we saw on October 7th, end quote. For Huckabee, evil is not an abstract concept. And let's be clear, the atrocities on October 7th were absolutely deplorable, not putting that into question. It's this way of characterizing it as evil. Evil is a moral absolute to Huckabee, right? It has an address, It's Palestine. That's evil. That's what he's trying to say, right? Evil cannot be negotiated with. It can only be destroyed. So I feel like I'm actually taking the dramatization part of this. She was very careful with her ethnography. And Tristan, you're going to totally dramatize this. but the stakes are high here, and I'm dead serious about this stuff. Okay, so even worse, Huckabee has consistently denied that there is a people or nation called Palestinians. I quote, "There really is no such thing as Palestinian. That's a political tool to pry land away from Israel," end quote. To go to the sort of messianic thinking here, in 2010, Huckabee said, "I think what I should do is convert," noting that his kippah covers his bald spot completely, he said. He continued with enthusiasm, I worship a Jew. I have a lot of Jewish friends. Now that should be a moment of pause right there, because we've all run into somebody who says, I've got a black friend, and then you know what's coming afterwards, right? Right? Anyway, and they kind of like, you evangelicals love Israel more than we do. And I'm like, don't you get it? If there weren't a Jewish faith, there wouldn't be a Christian faith, end quote. And here is both the positioning of Christians and Christianity, not as post-Jew, but part Jew. And the scholar Brian Klug puts this well. He says, quote, thinking that Jews are really Jews is precisely the core of anti-Semitism, end quote. Now, I had a nice quote from your book here about the allo-Semitism, but the copy you gave me, when you make notes in the margins, they disappear when you save it. Do you know that?
No,
Yeah.
no.
And you can't copy the text.
All
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah, it was really annoying. And I only found out afterwards. Anyway, so for Huckabee, the Jew is only a Jew insofar as they conform to his expectations, right? So here the territorial fetishization of the Jew is this anti-Semitic construction for the proper place of Jews in Israel, against which all other Jews are out of place globalists, for example, right? And that gets at the heart of this current rise of rightward politics globally, right? We have this vision of an ethno-civilizational thinking that assumes that people have a proper place in the world, yeah? And this should, not be transgressed. So, Latinx people in America to Republicans in Northern Ireland, there's an assumption that there is a geographical place and a social place. I mean, I was just reading this morning that the lead pastor at a church in St. Paul, Minnesota, right, is also the area's ice field leader, right? So in moving the U.S. embassy to Tel Aviv, Trump, from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, Netanyahu gave him the moniker King Cyrus, of course, was the pagan king used by God to deliver Jews from Babylonian captivity. It's this meaningful signal to many Christian Zionists to see Trump as a vessel for God's providential ends, yeah? And Trump is in this way kind of an end times accelerator whose presidency collapses prophecy, populism, and policy into a single political moment. He is a catalyst that amplifies Christian Zionist confidence, urgency, and geopolitical reach, right? We're talking tens of millions of people globally here. So for Huckabee and Hegseth, right, what happens next in Israel-Palestine will not be about politics. For them, it's about this violent vision, yeah? This, dismal fate for Palestinians and even Jews alike, right? Right? I mean, as I pointed out, Jews are simply objects in history. They're not part of the subject of creating history. Yeah, their story is to be explained. History is already created, right? History is read backwards. We can think of it as a kind of orthogonal, like a record, where you can sort of skip the stylus around to different periods of time. Yeah. And are we closer to the end times, center to the, closer to the center of the record? Yeah. So Veronique admirably avoids polemics through her careful ethnography, and it is really careful, and it's hard to do. It's hard, actually, I read this book in under 2 days. I'm a slow reader. I'm a careful reader. And for me, that's amazing to have read a whole book in 2 days. So that, it was really engaging. And that's difficult for an ethnography as well, right? Because, you're often long quotes, and you avoided those long wordy bits where you have these long quotes and you have these vignettes that you pull out, that you add context to, and it made it very readable and easy to read, and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, but you are very careful, and you're not polemical. I am. Right.
Look at that.
And but you note in there that one quote is God is a Zionist, and such a statement has implications for ethnic cleansing, for legitimized violence, and the danger for apocalyptic certainty finds compatibility with liberalism and a kind of exclusionary geopolitics. So that's my take. Excellent book. Thank you very much. Hopefully you sold a couple copies there. Yeah.
Thank you, Justin.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and congrats. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. We can take a few questions.
Oh.
Yeah. So we've got an audience online as well as in the room. So people online want to ask a question, either type it into the chat box, and Becca will pick that up, or raise your hand electronically, and we can get you on mic. Let's start with Pavel.
Thanks very much. Congratulations on the publishing of your book. What I wanted to say, I'm sorry, my hearing is a bit impaired today, so I might have confused a thing or two. Am I right to understand that it was a specific church in Northern Ireland you researched, or how did it look like? Or you spoke to several different congregations throughout Northern Ireland. How did it look like? Because you see, what sort of was the reason I came here was the subtitle of your book, which is For God, Israel, and Ulster, and that's obviously a reference to the motto of the Ulster Volunteer Force. And to be honest, what I wanted to hear was some sort of an explanation why you believe Israeli flags are so prominent in loyalist areas. And I just wanted to ask you if in your research you concentrated on speaking to those evangelical churches whose teaching or doctrine, or however way you want to put it, is somehow makes references to particular references to Judaism and the Old Testament and so on, or did you also engage with working class loyalism, and if yes, what was the geographical scope of your research?
Should we take 2 or 3 questions in a row, or do you want me to do one after?
Why don't we take one more? Relatively one does.
Sorry, I'm about to go and pick up my son. No, I found this super fascinating, and especially because I found so many similarities to my work. Oddly enough, I work with evangelical Roma in Finland, which is really kind of completely like geographical spaces and anything else. But I think I'm more interested in how your positionality within it, and the way, I guess, that became an opening potentially to engaging with the members of the community that you worked with, and whether that was accidental or not. And I can completely relate with that. The group that I worked with were also kind of Zionists, and they were conducting similar kind of pilgrimages to Israel through different routes, like not political. They never considered themselves political, but it was about Israel and pro-Israel. And they wanted to know about myself and my background, and I'm part Jewish, and that was the thing that stuck in all of our conversations, and that's how I was being introduced, even though I was never introducing myself as such. I became a very point of tension, personal tension within that. So I guess I'm interested, perhaps you can communicate together, so you can have a chat or talking. But because that's something that as ethnographers, anthropologists, sociologists, we always kind of deal with. And it's always a point of like not really knowing to what extent that's something that can or should be brought into discussion. And you're opening up yourself to others, and they open themselves up to you. But then ultimately, it's kind of a co-constructive process somehow, and becomes an opening and closure as well. So I was just wondering if that came up, as you kind of started talking to them, or that was your opening into connecting with them, and kind of how you navigated.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry that I'm.
No. I'll start with that question so that you can just run away after that. It was accidental. One of the things I didn't really necessarily realize myself, is that when you're Jewish, and especially when you're secular and it doesn't have a lot of importance for you, or an importance that is not religious, you do have the choice of not telling, who you are, and you don't. And it's a way, I think, to avoid anti-Semitism that we all do, that, pay attention. And so the first time I went to Ahava, I was sitting next to a man, and he introduced himself, and he looked at me and he said, "Are you Jewish?" And it never happened to me. And I felt so embarrassed, so surprised. And you just have a split second to decide what you're going to say, and just decide not to lie. I say yes. I say, oh yes, I knew it. And then at the end of the meeting, they introduced me to everybody. Say, oh, this is Veronique, and she's Jewish. And I felt myself, completely. I felt very embarrassed, but actually it says a lot about the thing that as Jews we internalize, to avoid anti-Semitism. And it became very important in the story because I think that research was probably easier or made possible by this. I have a research student, Claire, who is wonderful. And she comes from an evangelical background. She's not religious anymore, but she's going to study evangelicals. And it's much harder for her because they're like, well, you're not going to, which church are you going? And it's much more complicated. Whereas for me, I was not expected to go to church. I was not expected to already be saved by Jesus. And there was always a chance that, I would. And it really became part of the research because also the way they felt about me being Jewish told me a lot about how they felt about Jews. So you're right, it's totally co-constructed when you do fieldwork. You knock the first day at the door, you have no idea what's going to happen. It's extremely daunting, and at the same time, it's part of the story, and it is well. So the ability to do research depends so much on the people, their willingness to open the door and to explain things and to accept you for who you are. Yeah. And the second question, well, I'm really sorry, disappointed. So I'm just going to take the example of a very famous anthropologist, Lévi-Strauss, who studied the Nambiquara. It was like a little tribe in the rainforest in Brazil. And it was probably a few dozens of people there. And from that, he wrote one of the most monumental work, which is a structural analysis of kinship, which is a kind of universal, approach to kinship. So through very small little groups, actually, you can generalize a number of things. But one of the on the methodological point of view, what's very important, I think, when we work on could be the same for a party or for a trade union, but if you work on one congregation, which is my case, I always felt, or a new religious movement, as I did before, it's very important to actually study also the context. So when I was working on the Kabbalah Center, I would go to other Kabbalah classes, outside the movement, and I would talk about its detractors, its opponents, and the journalists who worked on it, and what liberal, Jewish representative or Orthodox representative thought about the group. So you need to actually look at the groups and its context. And because the people in this group were traveling into different churches, I would just go along with them. I would hang out. So I had a better idea of what is the network in which this group was part of. That's because religion is so fragmented and deregulated today that it wouldn't make sense to just study a group without, circulating as much as they do circulate. And they were also part of wider circles. So we talk about ICAJ, they would go to meeting organized by Northern Ireland Friends of Israel. So meetings that perhaps less religious and more political. And then you hang out with the people you study. And so that gives you an idea a bit of a more, a broader, if you want, landscape. And from that, you can have an idea of, why Christian Zionism is important for some people, but also why, the support of Israel and what Israel represents, can echo to, a wider audience. Some would be religious and some were not.
So basically, we're focused with a specific congregation and then spread out to different networks and all that. Does the answer more or less? Yeah.
No, it's not spread out. It's just that people don't exist in a compartment. Yeah, especially as today religion is organized, it's a network. It's people traveling. It's people meeting, interacting. It's much more like a network. So if you want to have a sense, you can't just stay in the glass. You just have to just hop, as they hop.
Kieran.
Veronique, I will dive quick. So, two things. First of all, you tell us a little bit more about you going on the trip with evangelical Christians to Israel. So my ex-wife's father was an evangelical Christian, and he's a lovely wee man. He started off Brethren, and then he became slightly more progressive. He moved to the Baptists, so, and that was a significant move for him. He was obsessed with Israel, and about something like tabernacles and stuff. He was a lay preacher and stuff. But anyway, one of the highlights of his life, he died in the 90s, was going on a trip that my ex-wife and her brother organized to Israel, and it was a place where him and I met in the middle because our politics would be quite different. But he went there, and I think it was just next to going to heaven for him. Like, it was just that we're not, and it was lovely actually. It was like I wasn't cynical about it all. He got a lot out of it. So I'd be very interested in maybe giving us a little bit more about what that trip was like. And a flip side to that is I'm interested in how Northern Ireland evangelicals deal with the complexities of Jewish and Israeli life, the realities of that there are lefty Israelis, that there are things called rabbis for human rights, that it's not. So I'm wondering, is it a blank check for the Zionist project, or how did your interviewee handle the fact that I'm sure it must have come up saying, actually, not every Israeli is pro-occupation. Actually, there are people who are, there are people opposed to the genocide. There are people protest. How do they handle that reality, the complexities of Israeli or even Jewish life in the States? There is of course. So how do evangelical Christians deal with that reality of Jewish life?
Oh, it's really, really interesting. So the trip in Israel, I think what I found really interesting is once. So in Ahava, I think most people would consider the Bible as the word of God, and so it's perfect, it's literal. And so what is in the book is as it happened. So traveling in Israel is therefore very different because you move from one place to another, or this is where the king did this, or this is where Jesus is going to come back. So your reading of the landscape is very peculiar. It's not like you and I, we go to Bali before the term starts. It's a very particular way of reading space and a collapse of time as well. What I also find very interesting is from the members of the congregation is the genuine desire to interact with Israeli Jews. So they started to learn a bit of Hebrew. Of course, they could use English, but to try to have the chance to communicate, to engage. And for them, the highlights, because we did some sharing after we came back from the trip, was the moment where they were invited by Jewish family for a festival or for a celebration. Really the desire to engage. And yet it's a hard one because we would also cross the path of Orthodox Jews, doing a certain number of rituals in the street at the Wailing Wall. And the idea is that actually for the people I studied, they were involved in empty ritual in some ways, because they haven't got that, the right thing is Jesus, and this is missing from the picture. So, there is a sort of difficulty for some, not for all, and some members of the group would have lived in Israel a long time and would get to know Israeli culture more. But for many, because here you have so few Jews, even if they wanted to engage, they didn't really know a lot of Jews or not very well. And so their understanding of Jews were very much mediated by all the ICJ and other Zionist and Christian organizations. So there is this paradox of really wanting to engage and then this high level of mediation as well. What I have to say is that when I was, I finished the fieldwork around 2019, so that was way before October 7th. And I didn't write about October 7th in the book because, I was finishing to write it perhaps in 2024. Way too hot, way too soon. Is it that some people started to think this is going too far? Or some people think, well, I think also there is a tendency to think that this is God's plan and we don't know what is God's plan. So we'll have to see. It's very difficult. And again, because of their very lack of knowledge of a lot of Jews and different Jews, you know, they do find probably difficult, and that would be true for all Protestants here, to understand the variation of who are Jews, you know. So you have secular Jews, you have left-wing Jews, you have gay Jews, you know, you have communist Jews, you have, you know, right-wing Jews, whatever. But I don't think here that Christian Zionists are necessarily totally different, and I'm going to be a bit polemical here, than perhaps people who are not Christian Zionists. You know, I felt since October 7 that you were talking about Jews being out of place for Christian Zionists. I think for, you know, people who are, you know, pro-Palestinian activists, Jews are also out of place, you know. It has become very, very hard to, you know, of course, you know, for a pro-Palestinian, if you're Zionist, well, you just, you know, at the end of the, but being a left-wing Jew, being also for Palestinian rights, you're also out of place, but you're also sometimes out of place in the pro-Palestinian group. So I think there's a very wide spectrum where actually Jews are always out of place, and I think it says something about Europe, about European culture and intellectual and politics, where, you know, yeah, I think it says more about this than Christian Zionists necessarily. Yeah.
Less concern about unionism or conquering itself in the States and all that. But it seems to me there doesn't seem to be much of a drive to align more with maybe I think Ethiopian Christianity is very kind of centered to the Old Testament more than most. And you know, there doesn't seem to be many appetite for empathizing, sympathizing, aligning with their school of thought. Rather, it's all aspects for what you go. And you know, what is the need to what's the rush for the end of the world? Just
What's the rush for the end of the world? I would like someone. Could we call Trump and ask him right now?
That small opening for a communist revolution. I think that's what Zizek said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there are very different ways to interpret prophecies, and I think there would be different views on that. What I often heard around the people I study is that there is a bit of it. Well, not everybody has a rush, but also a desire. There's a sense that the world is in crisis, which is not wrong. It's actually true. But also the idea that this crisis that is, you know, getting faster and more intense and more acute, it is felt strongly, but also is the sign that something is going to come up. And I think, you know, for a lot of people, and that's where class comes in, you know, for people who have difficult life, difficult, you know, worked hard, other, you know, issues in their life that were very, when you feel struggling, you know, the idea that there's something that's going to end here, you know, there's going to be an end, but also we'll be vindicated. You know, God, you know, Jesus is going to come back, and, you know, people are going to see that actually we were right here. You know, we follow God's word. We're the righteous ones. You know, there's a search of a relief, but for premillennial Christian, it comes after a crisis. But also, yeah, there is also a sense of a crisis. And again, you know, I think we all have today a sense of a crisis. So that's a complication. You know, it's perhaps that's why you think I'm not polemical, but I find them also interesting. And we tend to think conservative or fundamentalist people are so different. But actually, I find also what's interesting is that we're so the same in many ways.
Says congratulations, Betsy. And did you have any sense that
Messianic.
that's the one. Christians want Jews to convert, or are Jews more useful to them as Jews?
Oh, so there is a big disagreement around, among Christian Zionists. Some would say it's very important for them to know Jesus, because otherwise you go to hell. And so that's our mission. And and on the other way, for some, you don't have to press that too much because the Bible, explain that, when Jesus is going to come back, a few of them will recognize Jesus. And also that's all really what we need. So there are different approaches to this. And I think it allows some perhaps to feel like they don't have to be to pressurize, the Jews that they know, because they also know that it's not really well received. So, it can help also dealing with that, tension about we would like them to know Jesus, but at the same time, it's a very difficult things to do. So it depends.
So my question is, without giving anything away about the group itself, but how did that ever get started? So oftentimes you would be maybe as backup leader or somebody was it inputs from outside. Just be curious.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So it started with so yeah, there is a leader, and I think he was a people person and quite charismatic, who so he's interesting because he was saying, well, I was not really brought up religious, but my parents wanted to make sure that I was going somewhere, so they asked my aunt and my uncle to take me to a brethren church. So you think that there was probably still a religious environment, and he decided at some point to go to Israel to work in an organization around Christ Church, which has a messianic congregation, and in their a house called Bet Emmanuel in Tel Aviv. And there he said it was wonderful because it's Christian, but at the same time, in this messianic Israeli congregation, they were celebrating a Jewish festival. They were singing in Hebrew. He loves it. And he comes back to Northern Ireland and think, oh, well, this is, same stuff, all disappointing again. And he decides like, well, actually, this is where it's very, there's a key element here. He said, well, actually, the churches, they have their own agenda. I decided, to think a bit outside the box and to bring this messianic tradition to people, and people were drawn by it. They wanted something different. And what he's saying here, what he's expressing is this anti-establishment approach. The churches, have somehow lost the message. They sometimes, don't care about Jews or perhaps have ill feelings about Jews. They have lost the Jewish, the sense of the Jewish environment of Jesus' message. And we're going to bring this. So there's also a process of distinction. We do have that knowledge. We want to discuss that knowledge that the others don't have. So it came that way. It came as a sort of, as wanting to be an alternative to mainstream churches.
Okay, Becca, another question on that? Yes.
We have a question from Verity Steele, who says, although your book is mostly centered on Ahava in Northern Ireland, it obviously relates so closely to Israel. It seems that most of those in the group lack an in-depth knowledge and everyday experience of life in Israel and the variety of cultures in Israel. As an ethnographer, how much time have you personally spent in Israel in all areas? Are you fluent in modern Hebrew, and did you visit any of the Messianic congregations in Israel?
There were a lot of diverse experience in the group. Some members of the group lived for years in Israel and were speaking Hebrew and knew some of the traditions, and some did not. So it really depends. Myself, I went to Israel quite a few times. I started when I was doing my work on the Kabbalah Center, so I lived there for 3 months. I came back for this part of fieldwork and later for conferences. No, I do not speak Hebrew, and I do not work on the Israeli environment. That's a totally different kind of research that one can do, and some people should do it, and I think some people do. What I was interested in is really looking at the Northern Irish experience and how they interacted with Messianic culture.
So the back as well. Something.
Well, I started speaking, but the other question came in. Well, one fundamental question has to be asked, which was missing so far. How would you how do you define Zionism and how do you define Christian Zionism?
I don't know if we have to be really like to make it complicated. I think Zionism, there's a project of, Israeli nationalism, which is to build, a nation, for Jews on that land and to find justification for it. So Zionism can be secular and political. It can be Jewish and it could be Christian. On the side of Christian Zionists, there are also a lot of variations. Some people would say, well, actually, it's because of the dispensation. They believe in a particular type of theology. It's very often true, but it's not always true. For example, in East Asia, we found, tendencies or certain churches to be so interested in Judaism and in Israel that then they become interested in the theology, and it's not the theology that brings Zionism. I think there are a lot of variations, but I'm not sure it's that contentious. There are quite a few elements that you find among, Christian Zionists that would come back. For example, this quote in Genesis 12:3, God says, I bless those who bless you and I curse those who curse you. So there is this idea that, through Israel and the support and the love for Israel, you receive God's blessing. And that will come very often. It's important because you realize then that very often the attachment to Israel, yes, it has to do with Israel, but it has to do with Israel as a channel for God's blessing. So it has to do with people standing with God and as the ultimate, sense of following God's command. So one of my interviewees, I think it was the leader of the group, actually talked about Israel as for him being the acid test. It's a way of knowing someone is a true believer. Do you really love Israel? What would you do for Israel? Which means that are you really siding with God? Okay. And I think this is something that we'll find very often. But I'm not sure, what would you, I don't find it particularly contentious or difficult to.
The definitions of Zionism and
Yeah.
Christian Zionism.
Yeah.
I think you do deal with it in the book, don't you? You kind of
do.
sidestep it for precisely this reason. You say it's processual and it's always changing depending on who you're talking to about, what.
Yeah.
Yeah, rather than sort of pinning it down.
Yeah. But I don't know if you have a particular.
No.
Yeah.
No. I mean, I would have like a long, like hour-long lecture about the beginnings of Zionism, and we
Yeah.
talk about, and then, historically, and then we move
Yeah.
forward. But like a pithy definition, no.
Yeah.
So I think you did a really good job.
Mm.
Yeah. You write it down.
See?
Yeah.
So I think we might kind of bring our formal proceedings to a close now. So can we thank or rather congratulate Veronique
No.
on the coming on and commenting on it as well. So in such an
Yeah.
interesting position. Thank you all very much. It's been great. Please stay if you can, have a drink with us, celebrate the book a bit further. We have a seminar this time next week with Conal Parr from Northumbria coming to talk about his new book on the Irish anti-apartheid movement in the late 1950s, the early 1990s. So please come and join us at that if that's of interest. But otherwise, we'll move to the other side of the room.
Yeah.
Okay.